verse in hymns. And so we're looking forward to that on Sunday night, May 23rd. Invite a friend, invite a family member, somebody who you may hear from time to time and say, I wish my church did hymns every now and then. You say, hey, come on Sunday night, May 23rd, and join us for that. We're looking forward to that. And the following Sunday on May 30th, that will be Memorial Day weekend. A very large portion of our church family will be in Jackson, Mississippi, about 45 people roughly right now. And so a couple things are going to go on that morning. We're going to do, that morning will be hymns. We'll do traditional hymns on Sunday morning for that worship service, May 30th. And that Sunday will just be one worship service. We don't have a final decision from the leadership yet as to if we're going to go back full time to one service. But on May 30th, because it will be such a smaller group, because of 45 being on Mission Jackson and just the known reality of people going on vacation or Memorial Day weekend, that Sunday will be a one service, only 11 o'clock service. But there will be traditional hymns in that service as well. So if you're hangry for some old hymns, 2 Sundays in a row, May 23rd and May 30th, be some great times to be here for worship. On that Sunday, May 30th as well, following the morning service, after the 11 o'clock service, there will be a women's fellowship lunch in the gym. And so if you're late and want to come be a part of that, we invite you to stay and be a part of that on Sunday, May 30th after the morning service. One last thing before we pray, if you order t-shirts for a few minutes after the service tonight, Kim Kimber will be in the hallway back here, room 121, got in the middle of the hallway. She'll be distributing those t-shirts. If you order, go by there and see her tonight before you leave. Like I said, about 15 minutes after Bible study. All right, we won't keep her here too long. So get by there and get your shirt if you'd like to. I want us to pray together, and then Dakota is going to come and lead us tonight. And yes, James, yes.
Miranda's.
Oh, James Shipman.
Yeah, James Shipman. He is home.
He went to the hospital, was very sick, but Miranda said that he is home, still not doing very well, so just to keep him in our prayers.
All right, absolutely. Let's pray together, and then we'll get started. God, we love you. We thank you so much for this night. God, we thank you for just the day that you give us, God. And I know each one of us has been on a different path and a different journey today. God, I know some of our days are full, some of our days are good, some of our days were stressful and hectic. But God, no matter what we're coming in from this evening, I pray right now, Father, we just put that aside. God, we would just place that on you. You tell us you will bear our burdens through the day. You are a big guy and you can do that. And so, God, I pray tonight that we would just let those things go. We'll be able to completely focus our heart on you, our minds on you. Father, I pray right now that you would be with James. I pray that's right now, you're feeling on him, God, know exactly what is going on and what the extreme nature of it is. God, you do. And I pray that's right now. Just lift him up to you. Pray that you would touch him and bless him physically. And God, whatever method that you see to do, God, I pray right now it's a great position that you would tend to be able to take care of him tonight. God, I pray right now. I thank you for Dakota. I thank you for her gifts and her love for you. I just pray that you use her tonight and next week as she leads us. God, to continue to help our hearts grow more and more in love with you. God, as she leads through these studies. We love you. We just ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hello. I am so excited to be with y'all, be teaching tonight. I'm super thankful for Tim and the opportunity. If you didn't know, teach the women's Bible study every morning at 9:45 or 10. And so if anyone wants to join, we won't discriminate against men, but it is a women's class, and we have a lot of fun in there. And we have been walking through a series called Route 66, which basically is just walking through a book of the Bible every single week, giving you an overview and just giving us kind of a basic knowledge of every book in the Bible. And so when I was thinking about what to teach, I really wanted to draw from that because we recently went through 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and I fell in love with the contrast between King Saul and David and the theme that Hannah's song had throughout the book of 1 Samuel. So I wanted to maybe just do a character study so we can really look and see who Saul is and who David is, what their differences are, and why each of them either succeeded or failed. So a little bit of, actually question, first I'll do a question. When you think of pride versus humility, because that's kind of going to be the theme, what do you think is the main difference between pride and humility? When you think of yourself, or what you think of yourself?
Yeah, to me, pride is you're so proud of everything you accomplish, but humility is when you're kind of knocked down and, told what kind of job maybe you really do or how you go about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Pride is how you feel about yourself. Humility is keeping it to yourself.
Okay.
I was thinking just selfish and selfless.
Right, okay. So like the idea of the word self. We tend to think of pride and humility as being personality traits when really they're character traits. And so in the Bible, the main difference between pride and humility is that pride is self-centric, which is on your handout, while humility is serving-centric. So pride is self-centric and humility is serving-centric. So serving-centric in the sense of God and others-centric, rather than being self-centric. I think about the solar system, and so it's like when you think you're the sun and everything revolves around you, rather than you being a planet serving the sun. So our theme passage is going to be 1 Samuel 2, 4 through 8. So I'm going to get y'all to turn there while I give you a little bit of background, because the background is very important whenever we look at these two characters. So we have Saul. Our journey through 1 Samuel compares the two characters. God gives us examples of leadership. Saul is the first one. We've come recently from a time of judges. The judges were people that God rose up to be deliverers of Israel through times of turmoil and war. There was this cycle of sin that Israel and God kept going through, of sin and forgiveness, and creating this chaos and turmoil with war. He rose judges up to deliver them. But as we see in the end of Judges, it just doesn't work out. The people keep ending with doing things that they saw was right instead of doing things in the Lord's sight. So we have the Judges, which shows us how depraved humans are. And it shows us that God really wants Israel to think of him as their king. He wants them to think of him as their leader instead of a human being. Because they're God's people, they're holy and they're set apart. They shouldn't be like the other nations. They shouldn't need a human leader. They should only need him. But Israel keeps comparing themselves to other nations. So we get to 1 Samuel, and they say, we want a king. We want a king like all the other nations. We want to be like all the other nations. And so we want a monarch to rise up. So that's kind of the background of where we get 1 Samuel. So in the beginning of Samuel, 1 Samuel, Samuel is born to Hannah. Hannah was a barren woman, and she said, God, if you just give me a son, I will present him to you and he will be yours for all of his life. So God honors that and gives her a child, and it's Samuel, and she has a triumphant prayer, or a song, as sometimes it's called, in 1 Samuel 2. So I'm going to read 1 Samuel 2, 4 through 8. The bows of the warriors are broken, but the feeble are clothed with strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for food, but those who are starving hunger no more. The woman who is childless gives birth to 7, but the woman with many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He sends some down to Sheol, and he raises others up. The Lord brings poverty and gives wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the trash heap. He seats them with noble men and gives them a throne of honor, for the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. And I believe that God gave Hannah these words. These are Hannah's words to God about God's triumph and the person of God and God's character. But I believe that God gave Hannah these words because this passage, this prayer, is going to be a theme throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. In our class, we've talked about this, but 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings are kind of a 4-volume set. The reason we have 2 books and then 2 books is literally because of scroll length. Whenever Hebrew was written down, there was no vowels. And so whenever the Septuagint was created, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, they added vowels. And so the scroll just became too heavy for them to carry. So they made it 2 scrolls. So there's your fun fact of the evening. So this becomes the theme. And the theme is there on your handout that God opposes the proud and exalts the humble. And as Israel craves a leader, they find out that a good leader is humble and follows the Lord's commands, and a failing leader is prideful, lacks integrity. And so we're going to look at Saul, the very first monarch of Israel. He's already not starting off on a great foot, because God wants, again, He wants the people to see Him as their leader, God as their leader, because they're holy and set apart. But because they want to look like everybody else, they want to look like the world, they want to function like the other nations, they want a king. And so God allows them to have a king. But He tells Samuel, who is the prophet and priest born to Hannah in the beginning, He says you need to give them instructions. You need to say this is what a king is going to look like if you're going to have one. So He gives them a warning, and that is in, will somebody go to 1 Samuel, where is it? 1 Samuel 8, and read 7 through 9 in a booming voice, like Tim said last week, someone with a booming voice. 7 through 9.
It's not booming, but I'll try. The Lord told Samuel, do what the people tell you. They have not rejected you, they have rejected me. They don't want to be their king. They don't want me to be their king. They're doing the same thing as they've always done. I took them out of Egypt, but they left me and served other gods. They are doing the same to you. So listen to the people and do what they say, but give them a warning. Tell the people what a king will do to them. Tell them how a king rules people.
So, with God feeling rejected, not a great way to start off your leadership. So Samuel says, okay, and anoints this man named Saul. Now, there's a few characteristics of Saul that the people really liked. But I want to know, what general qualities do you look for in a leader, whether it be spiritual, whether it be political, whether it be at your work, in your life? What qualities do you look for in a leader? Confidence, honesty, knowledge, cares about the people, composure. Wow, these are all great answers. But let me tell you what they liked about Saul. He was tall. They liked Saul because he was tall. He was the most handsome man in all of Israel. He looked strong, and he came from a prominent family. So all of these answers that we give that have to do with like your internal qualities are, they're great. That's what we should be looking for in a leader. But they were like, you know what? His head stands above all the others. So I think we'll have him. And there's a reason for this. They weren't just like, hey, he's tall. You know, they had just lost a battle to the Philistines, and then God defeated the Philistines. So their track record is not so great. So they wanted somebody who would win wars. They wanted someone who looked strong, who had a commanding presence, basically someone who would make Israel look good in the face of war. So really nothing about his character, nothing about his heart, nothing about his leadership abilities. They just wanted someone who looked good. So Israel's motivation directly plays into how this turns out. So on your sheet, we're going to go through, we have a little stick person. And this is going to be a very pen participatory craft. So you don't have a paper. David in the back has some more. But we're going to look at 4 different components of who Saul is, because pride, while being a central character flaw, has different characteristics that fall under it. You know, there are things that make somebody prideful. So we're going to look at what makes Saul prideful by looking at 4 parts of his body. We're going to look at my artwork. Hold on. We're going to look at his head. So you can write on your paper. We're going to look at his head. We're going to look at his heart, and this is you holding a heart. So, heart. His hands and his feet. Normally in teaching there's this method called head, heart, hands, but we just added the feet. So we're looking at his head first. So number one prideful quality that he has is disobedience, and that goes in the head. So he's disobedient. Now, why would that go in the head portion? Because when you are disobedient to God's commands, you are being self-preserving. You are being self-preserving. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel 13. We're going to kind of just be skimming the entire book. So I'm going to be in 13, 7b through 9. So Saul, however, was still at Gilgal, and all of his troops were gripped with fear. He waited 7 days for the appointed time that Samuel had set, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the troops were deserting him. So Saul said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." Then he offered the burnt offering. So they're in the middle of battle, and Saul is told to wait for an appointed amount of time, and then Samuel is going to come and as the priest give the burnt offering. Well, as they're in hiding and in waiting, morale kind of drops down, and the troops start to desert Saul. So Saul, instead of continuing to wait for Samuel, who would be the only person who was able to give burnt offerings, instead of waiting for him like he said, he says, "You know what? I think I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to speed the process up. I'll do the burnt offerings. Everything will be fine." And it was not fine. And so Samuel comes and says, "What have you done?" So he is disobedient. He is self-preserving. So that is a quality of pridefulness in his head. That's just a start, though. This is one of Samuel's first failures, is being disobedient. Number 2, we get to his heart. Saul is unforgiving. And remember, pride being self-centric, when you're unforgiving, we forget about and negate the fact that God has forgiven us. So we have no right to not forgive someone else. So he is unforgiving. And in this story is, I'm telling you, there's some crazy stories in the Bible. So in this story, we're in 1 Samuel 14 and 14:27 through 30. So Saul he's a very vengeful man. So Saul has just made all of his troops take an oath. And he said, you can't eat. Take an oath right now, you cannot eat. So all of his men take the oath, they don't eat. Well, Jonathan, he doesn't hear. So he doesn't hear the oath. Super innocent, he doesn't hear them take this oath. So in verse 27, however, Jonathan had not heard his father make the troops swear the oath. He reached out with the end of his staff he was carrying and dipped it into honeycomb. When he ate the honey, he had renewed energy. Then one of the troops said, your father made the troops solemnly swear, the man who eats food today is cursed, and the troops are exhausted. Jonathan replied, my father has brought trouble to the land. Just look at how I have renewed energy because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the troops had eaten freely today from the plunder if they took from their enemies. Then the slaughter of the Philistines would have been much greater. So number one, Jonathan doesn't take part in the oath, mistakenly or not. He disobeys his father unintentionally. Number two, he badmouths his father to his father's troops and says, my father has brought trouble to the land. So not only is he disobeying, he is disrespecting his dad. And then when we jump to the end of the story, in verse 44, Saul declared, may God punish me and do so severely if you do not die. Jonathan wishes death upon his own son. So he is unforgiving. And I'm going to put the reference here. So we have our head with disobedience, we have our heart with unforgiveness, and then we have our hands. So Saul is progressively getting worse. We meet David in the middle of 1 Samuel, and right after one of the Saul does not respond to the victory like you would think a king would respond to the victory. So in 1 Samuel 18, verses 6 through 11, as the troops were coming back, when David was returning from killing the Philistine, the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing with tambourines, with shouts of joy, and with 3-stringed instruments. As they danced, the women sang, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Saul was furious and resented this song. They credited tens of thousands to David, he complained, but they only credited me with thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul watched David jealously from that day forward. And the next day, an evil spirit sent from God came powerfully on Saul, and he began to rave inside the palace. David was playing the lyre as usual, but Saul was holding a spear, and he threw it, thinking, I'll pin David to the wall. But David got away from him twice. So there's a little bit of a plot twist there. You've just killed the leader of the Philistine army, so I'm going to kill the guy that made that happen. So his pride, his disobedience, his unforgiveness, and really his backtracking from the Lord causes his hands to be resentful. Now, why wouldn't you want resentfulness in a leader? Or jealousy? His motivations are corrupted. Remember back to the definition of pride, self-centric. When you're resentful and jealous, you're not thinking of the collective. You're not thinking of the good of the people that you are leading. When I was in school, I did a project, and we looked at a study that looked at the morale, the economy of these countries, and there are different countries that are considered individualistic countries and collectivistic countries. So individualistic countries obviously contain people who are self-preserving, self-ascending. They want they're only concerned with the good of the individual, of themselves. And collectivistic countries are countries who are concerned with the good of the entirety. And so when looking at the research of countries that were considered individualistic and collectivistic, the economy was better. In collectivistic societies, morale was better, marriages lasted longer, there were more babies born. So all of the rankings that they had were consistently higher with collectivistic countries, and that's because those countries were thinking of the good of everyone rather than the good of self. So resentfulness and jealousy in a leader, those motivations being corrupt, can trickle down into your actions being corrupt. Obviously, those actions descended very quickly into a spear almost in David. And he continues for 4 chapters, Samuel. He continues for 4 chapters to try to kill David. So he is resentful and jealous. Then we have his feet. So we have a whole book where Saul rises to power, and as soon as he gets to the top, it's a crumbling down. It doesn't go well. He actually gets rejected, and Samuel informs him that God is going to raise another king, which is, we know to be David. So we get through the book, and at the very end, in chapter 28, we have Saul seeking outside wisdom. Whenever you're going through a rough time, what are some of your coping mechanisms? Good or bad? Huh? Fishing. There you go. What did you? Look for help? Yes. Eating. What else? Looking at ridiculously high price houses on Zillow.
What you're trying to do is get away from that. You're looking at something else.
Right. You're trying to leave. I think we talked in my class kind of about this. I don't remember when, but I remember, of course, my first one was eating. And then I schedule times to cry. So I'll schedule a shower, and I will just schedule 15 minutes to just weep. And like Jason knows, if it's not in the morning, if I'm just randomly coming home and I'm going in the shower, then I've had 2 weeks of just pent up struggle, and I just need to go let it all out. And I turn the light off in the bathroom, and I put my iPhone light on, and I play some musical, Hamilton theater musical, and I schedule my times to lose it. So there are coping mechanisms. What are some healthy coping mechanisms whenever we're struggling? Prayer. Reaching out. Now, what is our response? See, there's two kinds of struggling, two kinds of suffering. There's suffering that happens to us, and there's struggles that we cause. So when those are struggles that we cause, how do you react when confronted with you causing your own struggles? Denial. How many in this room would consider themselves, and be honest, to be defensive? How many of you would honestly say that you handle criticism and confrontation with the utmost class and grace? Sherry said, I'm teetering. Well, spoiler alert, Saul did not handle it well. So the response that God has to Saul's failures is to not answer him. When God, several times throughout the book, when Saul cries out to God, it says the Lord did not answer him because the Lord had left him. Saul decided he was going to seek help from someone else. At the end of the book, we have the Philistine gathering their army again. They cannot get away from the Philistines. And in 1 Samuel 28, 5 through 7, it says, when Saul saw the Philistine camp, he was afraid and his heart pounded. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him in dreams or by the Urim or by the prophets. Saul then said to his servants, find me a woman who is a medium so I can go and consult her. So if you don't know, a medium is someone, if you've never seen like Long Island Medium on TLC, a medium is somebody who speaks to and for the dead. And it is a supernatural witchcraft type demonic practice. So instead of recognizing that the Lord is not going to answer him because there's something wrong with him, he says, you know what, I'm going to go to a medium. And it does not go well for him. He seeks out other sources of wisdom. He was not patient, and he was not recognizing that he was the problem, and that his actions, his motivations, his heart, his disobedience, unforgiveness, resentfulness had led to all of these actions that made God not answer him and God leave him. And so instead of trying to be better, instead of humbling himself, he seeks outside wisdom. And so that's 1 Samuel 28. And the reason I wanted to use a picture of a person is because you see that these characteristics, they're all components under pridefulness, and they consume us as a person. Your motivations, your intentions, your heart is what drives your external actions, and it consumes you. And so if you let pride and all the characteristics of pride consume you, then that's who you're going to be, and that's what it's going to affect other people when you're only self-centric. So these are just some 4, but what are some other qualities? In looking at these, what are some other qualities that you think of that could be under the pride umbrella? Yeah. Yes, having an unrepentant heart really goes with both of these. Not only are you forgiving, you're not asking for forgiveness. So having an unrepentant heart. What else would go under the umbrella of pridefulness? Looking for the praise of men instead of. You don't need anybody's help. Arrogance. So these are all qualities. These are all qualities that Saul has. And we end with Saul being just the worst. I mean, he's the very first king of Israel. He has a chance to set Israel's monarchy off on the right foot. And instead, he displays all of these qualities, and his entire dynasty and legacy is ruined. He doesn't even get the chance for his sons to be the heirs of his throne. He ruined it so bad that in the middle of it, Samuel said, no, somebody else is going to come. Someone else is going to be anointed king, and he knew that was David. And so next week we're going to talk about David and his story. But one of the reasons that I really like these two character studies is these serve as Saul serves as basically a warning to Israel. He serves as a warning of what your leaders are going to look like if they're not walking in his ways, if they're not obeying his commands, if they are self-centric instead of serving-centric, instead of serving others and serving him. He serves as a warning of what the kings are going to look like. And we see later on, after David, just a slew of kings that whenever they are not walking in the ways of the Lord, destruction happens, chaos happens, wars happen, idolatry happens. And so there's a lot of things that roll out from the pride. So this week we look at Saul and we see his pride and we look at his character, and we are warned not just as a leader, because not all of us are in, none of us are kings, but not all of us are in leadership positions. But as a follower of Christ, you are put in a leadership position of being a disciple, being a messenger. And so it's a warning to us, for our sake, if we are prideful, we know Christians who struggle with pride. I'm not going to lie, that is one of my struggles is pride. And I struggle with it every day. And God reminds me that in a leadership position of not just, of my class or being Jason's wife or any other, as a believer and as a disciple and as a messenger, I am a leader. And so having this serving heart instead of having a prideful heart is going to directly impact everyone around me. So it's not just for the leaders, it's for us. And next week when we look at David, we'll see that David is not perfect. No one is. But we'll see how humble men deal with success and with failure. Any thoughts? Wow, kind of early. Saul should listen to his mom.
I think if we look at Jesus, he was like the ultimate leader. If those kings had taken on more of a servant's heart like Jesus had, their kingdoms would have been a lot greater. But they were completely the opposite.
Right. And we see when we see later on, we know that the Messiah comes from the line of David. So we see that David and his good qualities are kind of a marker for what the Messiah is going to look like. And so even before God makes that covenant with David, we see Saul in this is not what the Messiah is going to look like, because that really is the Messiah that Israel thought that they wanted. They thought that they wanted a political savior. They thought that they wanted somebody who would help them win wars and be the top economic and political country. They didn't know that their real saving need was internal. It was their hearts. So Saul is also a picture of what the Messiah is not going to look like.
Well, if you think about it, when people, you've heard the term power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think the more power you get, it just amplifies your prideful nature. And those kings, no matter how good they would try to be, some of that would always have to pop out because that's their position. And Saul was the worst case.
Yeah. Awesome. So I wanted to kind of end the way that we end our classes. And Karen and Sherry are here, and we end our classes doing what we call our lovelies. It's not a girly word. Boys can be lovely. But since we have time, the way that we end our class is we go around and we share, basically it's sharing praises, but we share either something that God showed us in the last week or a praise. And so ending the class by showing gratitude to the Lord is how we end every class. So if I would love to have at least 5 people share with me a praise or a lovely. A lovely. Murphy, you're lovely. So I need 5 people to share a lovely. Sam.
My friend's husband had a really bad headache all last week, and he luckily spoke up and went to the doctor, and they called a brain aneurysm before it ruptured, and he's gonna be fine.
That is absolutely lovely. They caught a brain aneurysm before it ruptured. Oh, yay. That's awesome. I have been on a waiting list before. No. Did you have one, Murphy? I thought I saw you raise your hand. Murphy. You're lovely.
Yeah, I don't know. My counselor, or our senior counselors came and was like, Mr. Murphy, what's wrong with your role? I'm like, what do you mean what's wrong with my role? Do you know how many seniors you have failing? And I said, oh yeah, I'm well aware of it. And she's like, are they all going to fail? I said, no, but I'm not going to let them know they're not going to fail. So I made them work hard. The beautiful part about it was they started coming in during my prep hour. They started coming in after school, and I got to be able to have that nice one-on-one, and they can see, that care I have for them. They can see that relationship, and I was able to make a call to the counselor today. I said, by the way, if you look at my roles, not a single one of my in-class seniors is failing now. So that made me feel pretty good.
Yeah.
They all came in, and now all of them are passing, and we just got to work on our virtual kids.
Teachers are definitely heroes.
They got 2 weeks.
2 more. Telling you, whenever we first started this practice, it was hard, but I think that vocalizing your gratitude of what God has shown you or God has done really it changes your outlook for the rest of the day, and it makes you more intentional in your praying. So 2 more. Now y'all got some lovelies. Chuck, what's yours? Congratulations. Is your brain as good as it used to be? Is your brain as good as it used to be? Don't let him fool you. Okay, I'll do our last one. So my lovely is that I've not been on a family vacation in years. I either have to work or I have to work. So my sister is going on like a whole summer job where they bring VBSs to churches, and so this is my time to spend with her before she goes on this, and so it's my first time being on a family vacation in forever, and I'm pumped. So that is my family time. And Jason's probably lovely because he gets alone time. So, okay, well, thank you guys. So next week, I know we're ending a little early, but next week we're going to do David, and we're going to see how humility is the characteristic that God would rather us have. So Phil, would you mind praying for us?